Are you looking to sharpen your skills, boost productivity, or take your career to the next level? The IISE Training Center offers world-class professional development built for busy engineers, managers, and problem solvers. Whether you're diving into analytics, earning a Lean Six Sigma certification, or exploring supply chain logistics, our expert-led courses deliver practical tools with real results. Learn online or in person with options tailored to every career stage. Plus, our training works. Past participants have applied their knowledge to save their companies over $250 million in real-world projects, and 90% of Lean Six Sigma candidates pass their exam on the first try. Visit iise.org/training to explore the full course catalog and start transforming your career today.
Here's the problem. Elections are one of the most complex and consequential systems we rely on. Decentralized, human-driven, time-critical, and under constant scrutiny. Yet most of us only see the final output. But behind the scenes, thousands of decisions have to be made with little margin for error. And if something goes wrong, it can have a huge effect on public trust. So how can industrial and systems engineers help design these systems, identify risks, and help strengthen the human factors involved, all without becoming political? On this episode of Problem Solved, IISE's Keith Albertson sits down with Dr. Natalie Scala of Towson University to unpack how ISE tools are being used to address election security, misinformation, poll worker support, and more. Join us.
Natalie, hello. Thank you for joining us today. It's great to have you back on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's always good to be with you.
Yeah. Well, last time we talked about elections was 5 years ago, which is a long time ago. And a lot has happened since then. At the time, we were in the middle of the pandemic and we were headed toward a big election that year. And you had begun working on elections and working with some election officials. You've done a lot since then, and a lot has happened since then. But let's go back for a minute, just talk about how you got involved in elections and how you applied industrial and systems engineering to this in a way that I don't think a lot of people maybe thought was a fit for ISE at the time, but it's turned out to be a very important aspect.
Sure. So we started our lab, which is Empowering Secure Elections. We're housed primarily at Towson University in Maryland. We started early 2017, and our big motivation was sort of the allegations about meddling, foreign interference, questioning about vote counts. It all started quietly after the 2016 election. And our lab is inherently nonpartisan. We let the data tell the story. Sometimes we have a history of looking at some pretty politically charged questions, but we put data around them to see what's really going on. But we had some concerns about the health of our democracy. I personally felt like I wanted to help or contribute or just, patriotism, I guess, in some ways. So we started looking at what is going on at the local level. So a lot of the research before 2016 looked at elections primarily at the state level and primarily from a cyber hacking, traditional cybersecurity perspective. But where people interact with the elections process is at polling places primarily, or with your mail-based ballots. But primarily they happen at polling places, high school gyms, churches, things like that. And there wasn't a lot of energy and research attention put into those situations. But poll workers are our first line of defense in elections. We need not only the correct count, a free and fair election, but we also need the American people to believe in the outcome of it for our democracy to work. So people need to have a positive, affirming experience at the polling place as well. And in terms of industrial and systems engineering process, right? I mean, how do people interact at the polling place? What do they do? How do we keep the vote intact, the integrity intact from the cast to the counted moment? That's all supply chains. That's all processes. That's classic IE.
Mm-hmm. And you've handled different aspects of this. You had an article for us a few years ago in the magazine about mail-in ballots, which obviously became a very popular way to vote during the pandemic. There's just so many different aspects of this. Tell us about some of the work you're doing. What different facets of voting and elections are top of mind to you, and how you go about gathering all this data as well from so many different sources.
Sure. So we keep the polling place, the local election, the insider, the trusted insider, which whether that is the poll worker, the elections official, we keep all of that in the front of our work. We really stay in kind of like on the ground, if you will, in terms of how people are actually interacting with elections. In terms of mail balloting, we had a couple studies during the pandemic about we went from a process that was primarily absentee. It was a process that was in place really since the Civil War in some form or another, some sort of mail balloting. But overnight, essentially, during COVID, it became this huge process, a primary
Right.
way for lots of people to vote for lots of different reasons, shutdown reasons, concerns about the virus, congregation reasons, all that kind of stuff. And there was a political thing going on about mail voting in 2020, but there's a real true IE research question there. When you dramatically scale up a process essentially overnight, maybe within a couple of weeks, but essentially overnight, do we introduce risk into that process? Because we move from something very small to something very mainstream.
Right.
The short answer from that study is that no, we don't necessarily introduce new risks. Mail voting disincentizes an adversary from trying to meddle in the election, and it also increases voter turnout and voter engagement. So we believe that that is a double win for democracy. So we had that study, but then we also started to think about as people returned to the polling place and we started to unthaw, if you will, from COVID restrictions and started to loosen them. Really, the poll worker is a primary key person in this process. And there's about 1 million poll workers nationwide that are needed for a presidential election cycle. They're all altruistic for the most part. I mean, could a poll worker be rogue and want to be adversarial? I guess that's theoretically possible, but they are predominantly college students, retired folk, predominantly, not exclusively, and they just want to help out and have an election, help with the election. But they have incredible responsibility because they are interacting with U.S. critical infrastructure, elections equipment. They are responsible for making sure those who have access to the ballot get a ballot. Everybody gets that chance to vote, and the polling place runs smoothly on election day. So there's a lot of opportunity there to help them out with their cyber hygiene behaviors, to help them out with process, to help move people through the polling place, make sure those ballots are secure. And that was an area where we really haven't seen a lot of IE research, like I said, before 2016 and even really before 2020.
Mm-hmm. And they're kind of a forgotten part of this in some way too, because you've got folks, as you say, volunteers from different
Yeah.
aspects of society. They're not professionals at this.
No.
And to some extent, you almost have to retrain a staff over and over again, personnel wise, for different elections, because you're going to get a different group of people. I mean, that's one of the challenges they face, I would imagine.
Absolutely. And we would classify them, I think, in supply chain research or retail research as highly seasonal.
Yeah.
They come in for essentially a day or early voting. But you're absolutely right, Keith. They bring whatever behaviors they have at home to the polling place, right? They do
Hmm.
go through training. In Maryland, there's an extensive 4-hour-ish training session they have before election. Sometimes they're longer depending on the county and things like that. But are they going to learn a culture of security in 4 hours? No, they're learning how to use equipment and things like that. So we looked at a lot of ways to help poll workers improve that training, to get more into, I guess, the way they do their jobs, to look at what kind of behaviors they might be bringing in terms of cyber physical insider threat type behaviors, but really risk, not necessarily threat. Poll workers could be a risk. Anybody can make an honest mistake and have an issue. So we've done some work with that, and we've also worked with counties in Maryland to actually improve that training process and improve that daily election day process as well.
Hmm. And you had mentioned there's an app in the works that you're trying to work on. Tell us about
Yeah.
that and what it may offer them.
Yeah, so this app will be available in some counties in Maryland in 2026 for this cycle here. We are hoping to expand that, but we're using a couple test counties here in the 26th gubernatorial cycle. So, midterm cycle, excuse me. So Maryland really runs midterm and general and presidential election cycles. They don't necessarily, they run some local ones off season, but the real statewide ones run every 2 years. So we're really piloting it this year, and we poll workers are going to be able to interact with some of the basics, definitions, intro type work in the app. They're also going to be exposed to potential cyber physical insider risks that could happen, so they can be aware. The biggest thing with a poll worker is to raise that concern. Could they mitigate themselves? Yes, they could put the card with the password on it away. They could lock their screen when they step away for the restroom or to help somebody. That's very, kind of 101 things, but there are other things that they can do to raise concern or awareness to a chief judge or the Board of Elections if they see something, potentially kind of see something, say something. So we want them to be aware of what they need to be watching out for. And also, the app is based on pedagogical education research in terms of segmentation and interaction and usability studies, and a lot of stuff we've actually published before at IISE conferences. We're just applying now into some of this work too. Some of the usability stuff we looked at, some of the process stuff we've looked at. So it's really a nice way. I'm excited about it because it's a culmination of that theoretical or applied research we've done for academia into an actual usable, touchable app that poll workers can use to support their training and hopefully improve their security behaviors at a polling place.
Just make them more comfortable as they come into that role.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And two, if they're hired late and they don't have time to go through the formal
Which
training, at
happens,
least they
yeah.
have the app to sort of have that initial exposure to what they'd be working with.
Right. Yeah. We've worked with election officials in Maryland, you mentioned. Do they come to you? Do you go to them? How do you hook up with these folks?
So we actually initially went to some election officials we had in our network in 2017, but now predominantly they come to us. We've also worked, the University of Maryland has a partnership with the State Board of Elections in Maryland. So sometimes needs come through the University of Maryland, and that partnership is mostly with political scientists. So we complement their work nicely by bringing some process IE stuff, and they bring a context to our work that we don't necessarily see, the whole how applicable it is or to make it work in the context of what an election is,
Yeah.
and I think that is something that IEs, especially when we optimize, sometimes miss. We come up with a really great product or solution or analytic or something, and we sometimes don't necessarily consider the organizational context. Could it actually work in that context? Are we
Yeah.
continuously improving, or are we jumping to the optimal without those continuous steps? So our political science colleagues at Maryland, and we do have some colleagues at Georgetown too, are really helping to put the context around our work and making sure that it's actually going to be usable and beneficial in the environments.
And with all the scrutiny of elections in recent years, I would imagine they're much more willing to accept process improvement maybe than used to be the case. I mean, certainly they feel the need for this now.
We have some very strong election officials in Maryland who are very much committed to making sure as many people vote as possible, to help their processes out, to help their their expectations. Elections of typically nationwide, not just Maryland, are run locally, and those budgets are not huge.
Right.
So, anything we can do to improve a process, make it easier on them, you know, thousands of 400,000 registered voters in just one county in Maryland, and we have to serve all of them, is definitely anything we can do, and continuous improvement is helpful.
Well, now, just shifting gears a little bit, there are different challenges that elections face, the internal part of it that you're working on to improve the process, to streamline what the workers are doing and how votes are tabulated. There are a lot of outside agents that are making things harder for everyone, passing along misinformation, deep fake videos, that kind of thing. How do we go about restoring trust and maybe making technology work more for the process than against the process? Is there any solutions to being able to handle that and kind of move past it so people are more trustworthy of elections?
Yeah, I think there's two main pieces to that. There's this short-term piece and then where are we going to be in 20 years kind of piece. But in terms of the short term, and I actually had this experience at Target the other day. You walk into Target near my house, and there's a couple near, clean, open, bright lights. Target is struggling with the number of employees, but in terms of the actual shopping experience, clean, bright lights, good Macy's, same way, fitting rooms clean. I was in a Target in another area of Maryland up by work, and it was a mess. There was not enough employees. There was boxes everywhere, stuff on the floor. I was like, I am not coming back to this location. I'm going to go to another location. And that's very similar in polling and in elections. If we go to a polling place and we stand in line for 6 hours, and I've had students tell me, oh, we stood in line for the president election. It was 7 o'clock. They called Maryland and we were still standing in line. We haven't even voted yet.
Yeah.
You have those types of experiences. People are not going to be excited about engaging in the process. If you have experiences where you feel like your vote doesn't matter or your vote's not being properly counted or your poll worker was rude or whatever could happen, you're not going to believe in the process or you're going to have challenges. There is research that's not mine that says that even a single exposure to misinformation or disinformation, and disinformation is the intent to mislead rather than just, making a mistake, does start to shape our belief systems. So, some of that stuff can be brewing in the back of your mind, and then you have an experience that quote unquote validates it for you, whether that's true
Yeah.
or not,
Yeah.
so for us, having those clean, tight processes, poll workers who are less likely to make a mistake and all those other issues, really we feel helps to dispel that narrative
Hmm.
and providing information that is true, correct from the state, and helping Maryland get, at this point, Maryland poll workers and Maryland citizens get that in their hands and they know it's trusted from the state also helps. Where are we going to be in 20 years? I don't know right now, but I think we need to think about it because boomers are only going to be about 4 to 5% of the population in, the voting population in about 2050-ish. We're going to see a lot of Gen Z, Gen Alpha voting. So what does that mean? And how do they interact with their lives? Gen Z, Gen Alpha predominantly, run their day, run their lives differently than boomers do, and even some other generations. So we have to think about, keeping voters engaged. What does that look like for voters who don't necessarily do pen and paper as much too?
Yeah. And first impressions matter because you got a young voter or a first time voter who hasn't gone through the process and it's
Right.
a bad experience for them. That's like you say, go into a store and have the same impression. You've got to make that good impression from the get go.
Right. And Maryland has a new process where you can request your mail ballot online delivery. You print it out at home, you fill it out, you put it in a Dropbox or return it to the Board of Elections. That's wildly popular, people printing their ballot at home.
Yeah.
And that just, I think, starts to point to some of the new trends that may be emerging, not necessarily just with mail voting, but just voting in general over the
Hmm.
next couple decades.
Yeah, and there are other process, and that one of the issues is there's so many processes involved, and that's because, as you mentioned, it's all local jurisdictions and
Right.
states, and they have their own way of doing it. There was one area I can't remember where it was. I want to say it was Alaska, where they did some online voting for municipal elections, where people could vote online. Doesn't work for everybody, obviously, but we have mail-in, we have paper ballots, we have machines. Is there any way we can somehow standardize this, or is it just going to be something we got to work with this sort of piecemeal approach?
So our international listeners might be kind of interested by this. The federal government does not run elections in the
Right.
US. It is a state process. And when I talk to my international friends, they're like, "Oh, what?" So there's 50 at a minimum, there's 50 separate state processes plus the territorial processes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we got that. And then some states run a pretty, I don't want to say a tight ship, but they have a pretty standard process. So Maryland has one predominant type of voting equipment, and then they have one other, basically a paper ballot going through an optical scanner. If you have disabled access needs, or even if you're able-bodied, you may also choose a ballot marking device, which is a touchscreen type environment that helps with those with disabilities, sight and sound disabilities, and touch and things like that. Also vote. So that's it. Like, that's what Maryland uses. Do counties sort of round the edges, if you will, and kind of customize the process a little bit to themselves? They sure do. But those are minor type of touches, if you will, based on really the size of the county and the population they're serving and things. But then you have other states where the counties have way more control, the counties and the localities. And sometimes the equipment used across the state isn't even standard. Different counties,
Right.
different regions are using different things. We did a paper very much at the beginning, showing that the standard processes have their own challenges too, because if an adversary wanted to target a standard process, then once you're in one, you're in all. A standard situation. If
Right.
you have different equipment, you have to target different things. I also want to be clear that we don't have evidence that an election in the US has ever been targeted at scale to affect an outcome. We don't have that evidence, but we are here to make sure that that never happens.
Right. What problems might we have on the horizon? I don't know if we can look ahead and see what could be coming because you're busy dealing with what's there. But as this evolves over time, are there other ways that bad actors could get involved that we have to anticipate, somehow stay ahead of them, a step or two ahead of what processes or infiltrations might be a threat?
It keeps us busy. But
Okay.
I think some of the other more predominant work we've done is look at an attack tree for elections at both the mail level and the in-person optical scanner level. Attack tree is basically a work breakdown structure for cybersecurity. You start at the top, that's your threat, compromise something, and then you go down the tree, basically to show lowest level activities that have to happen, right, for something to be successful. And there's AND gates and there's OR gates. AND gates don't necessarily have to be in parallel. They could be in sequence, but multiple things have to happen. OR gates, one or more. Fault trees, basically, too. I know a lot of systems engineers use fault trees a lot. But attack tree is a cybersecurity version of this. And what we did was the Elections Assistance Commission published attack trees in 2009. That was before elections equipment was considered critical in the US. It was obviously before COVID and all the changes we had like that with that, drop boxes and things like that. And like to your point, Keith, the adaptive adversary. The adversary is not technologically in the same place or motivations that they were in 2009. So some of the work we've done is update those trees and to put a mathematical utility-based risk assessment around it too, because states and localities can't necessarily focus on everything. They have that limited budget that I talked about. So what are the threats of most concern that we should chase? And if you want to think of it in IE terms, that's a bottleneck. Chase that, break that
Right.
bottleneck, secure that, and then let's go to the next set. And the classic things like efficient frontiers and all that all come into play here. And yeah, we use those types of tools to figure out what to be most focused on and when.
Mm-hmm. And new technology. If there's any new
Right.
technology out there that might be both more secure and also easy to use, I guess that's kind of a target that they might want to aim for.
Yeah, exactly. New technology is interesting because we have such a history, tradition in the US of lining up to vote. But we're also noticing that lines and that queuing, those processes aren't necessarily reaching everybody too, which is becomes a very politically gray area quickly. If both sides of the aisle have very strong opinions on that, different ways. But there is a technology piece too. If we want everybody, as many people voting as possible, we are going to have to be creative about how to reach them.
Mm-hmm. Now, what's ahead for you as far as the work your team is doing, but also annual conference? You've been a presenter at annual conference several times.
Yes.
We hope to see you there again. Do you have something planned at the upcoming event?
Well, first of all, annual conference is always a good time. Like there's a great, there's an actual networking
Right.
component of it, but there are a ton of people I don't see all that often, but I see at annual conference, and that makes it a very, very fun experience. I will say that. So yes, I will definitely plan on being there. What are we looking at for annual conference? Well, we definitely want to have people, if we can, in a session, test and try out our app. Even if you're not a poll worker, we are going to be writing some studies this year about the usability of it, how people interact with it, pedagogical type, kind of like engineering education type studies as well, to make sure it is people actually learning the way we want them to learn from it.
Yeah.
So we hope to be able to demo it there. We're also going to be talking a little bit generally about our overall research and where our trajectory was, the types of risk analyses we've been able to contribute to the academic literature, and then how hopefully in 26 and beyond, we're now starting to translate that into actual usable, tangible improvements in actual processes. Like I said, the app, different ways we can get that research into action.
Well, we look forward to that. Is there any way people can find out more about your group if they're interested? You have a website and some contact information we can also include in our show notes.
Sure. So my website is just drnataliescala.com, drnataliescala.com, one word. For me, there's a projects page that goes through all the papers we've had, including the ones from annual conference. There's a media page that sort of summarizes some of my work when I've done other types of media engagements. That's probably the easiest way to learn more. There's a contact us page there too, if you want to fill it out, and that comes to me and my lab, my students. Or you can just email me as well. It's just nscala, nscala @towson.edu.
Great. Well, thanks so much. It's been very enlightening. I'm glad we were able to catch up and find out what you're working on. We'll do it again in 5 years to see where we are. And we thank you so much. Getting people to vote and making it more secure and more attractive to people is really important. And it's something we appreciate, and we certainly want everybody to get out and vote this year because it's important to do. So
yeah.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. I really appreciate being here. This was a good time.
A big thank you to Dr. Natalie Scala for sharing her work and for her commitment to using systems thinking to strengthen such an important issue. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a colleague and make sure you subscribe to Problem Solved so you never miss an episode. Join us next time. Every great solution is a story worth telling.